Y'all remember that Superman movie where the mirrors flipped and they were trapped in it? Yeah. All right, we are live on the YouTube. So for whoever's out there, yes, ma'am. The link is live. Oh, I'll post it up on the group me. Sorry. Yes, ma'am. Let me grab it real quick. We can't exclude Mammy. Yes, ma'am. We can't exclude Mammy. Yes. There it is right there. All right, there it is, Miss Christie. Yes, ma'am. Everybody got it. I heard it ring. Everybody's phones went berserk. All right, we are going to start in Isaiah, and this is part 7, but we're not in chapter 7. We're actually a little bit ahead of the curve there. And so we'll play soap opera catch up like we normally do. Do y'all remember the image we used last week to connect what we're on with where we are? We used an image. Anybody remember that? It was a what? No, it was a sinking ship. We're on a sinking ship. That's what, whenever you look at scripture and you look at what's going on, what Isaiah is teaching us, big picture wise, is that this world is passing away much like a sinking ship, and we're not meant to hold on to that ship thinking that we can save the ship. It's that we are meant to help other people as we're getting off the sinking ship. And so that was the mental image that I had, that picture of that barge that had ran aground and water was taken on. And then we also talked about, if y'all recall, we talked about what was going on with the whistling. Do y'all remember the whistling? Who did the whistling? Yahweh did the whistling, God. And who was he whistling to? What two types of insects? The flies and the bees. The bee came from which part of the world? The bee was the Assyrian, and the fly was the Egyptian. Very good. The fly was the Egyptian. And remember, we talked about how scripture connects to one another. It's like a huge Wikipedia page, and how the scripture interconnects with one another, and it's a hyperlink. And we talked about how the fly was representative too of the plague of Egypt. Do you remember that? One of the plagues of the when Exodus and Moses left Egypt with the Israelites. Remember the fly plague? And so we see that. We also saw that last week that Yahweh will not tolerate disobedient people at all. Whenever he sees disobedience, he will bring disobedience back into line, even through his own means. And we saw the anger of God, the anger of Yahweh be talked about, and how he was whistling to these Assyrians and to these Egyptians to come and take back the promised land. Remember, he even said that he was going to cause, who was going to cause the land to fall back into disruin? God himself was, Yahweh was. He was going to be the one that caused the land to fall back. But he said there would be a people who were left, and this is a key term biblically that we talked about just a little bit, but what is that key term biblically? There was going to be a remnant left. And that remnant is that is us. We are the remnant of God even today, left in the world to be an example to others. And that's what we see as this remnant that's going to be left. And so this week, as we move into Isaiah, remember we talked about, we had gotten to a point where all the way through 1 through 6, remember, we were just thinking, oh, these poor people. Their whole life, it's just like, this is going to just be horrible. And then what we see is 7 through chapter 39 is a grouping. Isaiah 7 through 39 becomes another grouping of text to where it even goes deeper. But we see glimpses within there of what it would be like as Yahweh manifests himself into their presence through Isaiah and through other people. So we get to see little bitty glimpses of that as we go along. And we're going to see tonight a symbol of the prophets through the children. And that is going to be a direct connection into Jesus. Whenever we look into the New Testament, Jesus is actually going to point back and he's going to talk about this part of the Bible, this part of his Old Testament, which is known as the Torah. And he's going to talk about the Torah and he's going to say, I am, Emmanuel. And we're going to see that tonight even more so. And then what we're going to see is Isaiah is going to implore these people, please, for all that's good in the world, listen to me. I'm the voice of God to you. The prophet has come and he's trying to tell you on behalf of God, turn from your wicked ways. This will help. And so tonight we'll see that actually happen. All right. So Isaiah 8, as we move into Isaiah 8, what we're going to see is, and I can't help it. Every time I hear the word booty, it makes me think of the pirate flag. We went to Dolly Parton's. Have y'all been to the pirate show up in Gatlinburg? Where is it? Pigeon Forge? It's in Pigeon Forge. And up at, they have the pirate flag. Hey, Mr. Phillip, grab a plate to eat. And on the pirate flag, it said, surrender the booty. And it had all the stuff that went along with it. And I can't help but every time, and we're going to study this phrase tonight, this phrase, Mahir Shalal Hashbaz, that is the name of the son of Isaiah. Now, how would you like to be in kindergarten with that one? Please, no. I'm going to make you write your name 20 times. No. And so it means swift is the booty and speedy is the prey. And that's the reason I got the pirate flag up there. I couldn't resist. I had to have the pirate flag. And so swift is the booty and speedy is the prey. And I wanted you to have that definition before we read this together. And it'll make more sense as we begin to read this scripture together. All right. So here we are. We're going to watch just a brief video. I'm not going to do the audio out loud. I'm going to talk you through it. But one of the places that we're going to visit tonight, and you know how, for those of you who are new to Bible study, we like to understand where it is we are. Because if we don't understand where we are, then we read scripture and we miss a large portion of what's trying to be communicated from that scripture. And so tonight, we're going to be in Damascus. It's one of the places that Isaiah calls out. And so this is a UNESCO video about the modern day Damascus, and it's the best we got. Whenever you see the city, you're going to realize, oh, no wonder we can't look back like we can in some of the other places of scripture and actually see sort of the historical and archaeological context. You're going to see that it's been redone, and you're going to see why here in just a second. So here we go.
The utopia of water and greenery, ancient city of Damascus.
Inside of Damascus. I don't have the exact year that it was built, but this is still mine.
This is the Hejaz Railway, which became known to many people after a failed ambush attempt led by T.E. Lawrence, also known as Lawrence of Arabia. The train is heading towards the sacred Islamic city of Damascus. The capital of Syria is widely known as the Pearl of the Orient. Towering Roman columns stand at the entrance of the city market. Damascus thrived as a trading hub between Mesopotamia in the east and the Mediterranean in the west. The town had its heyday in the 7th century, after it became the capital of the first Islamic dynasty. The Umayyad Mosque was constructed at that time. Craftsmen from all over the world were called upon to build this mosque that took 10 years to build. The mosque has a variety of Islamic architectural features. It has been revered as a sanctuary for over 1,300 years. The worship of idols is forbidden in Islam, so there are no statues inside. Instead, the interior is decorated with texts from the Quran and beautiful stained glass windows. However, on the wall of the prayer room facing the courtyard is a rare painting of a realistic landscape. This golden mosaic is believed to be the image of heaven as described in the Quran. It was the abundant water supply that earned Damascus its reputation.
So that's the reason you see the reliefs. But what did you notice that is important in those reliefs? What did you just see that was big on the wall there? Lots of gardens. And what does that remind you of from Scripture? The Garden of Eden. It reminds you of Jerusalem. It reminds you of the Promised Land, shouldn't it? And so we see all of a sudden these mixture of stories occurring. And this is the relief.
This is the Barada River, which runs through the suburbs of Damascus. It is said that the word Damascus originally meant the place where water is gathered. In Islamic teaching, water must be shared with everybody. According to teachings, if someone shares water, this act consoles the departed souls of one's loved ones. Water is a symbol of happiness and also a tool to strengthen faith. The city of Damascus has been loved by many people as an invaluable sanctuary, connecting this world to the next.
And today, so you know, water is this important in Israel. We literally see them fighting over water rights. And you say, why? I mean, they've got the Sea of Galilee, they've got the Dead Sea. It's a huge ecological system that just continually feeds itself. Why would they fight over it? Because it is the most valuable resource. We might come down to money, we might come down to land, but if you don't have water, you don't have life, correct? But what do we know about Judaism? And this is important tonight. What does Judaism teach about water in two different perspectives? It's chaos. And why is it chaos? What is in the depths of the water? Do you remember all the way back to Genesis chapter 1? What did we learn about the rakia, the dome that covers the earth in the new? Do what? Sheol. That, yes, that we see the water is where Sheol exists underneath it. And so the water, remember, it had the great beast. Do you remember that? It was the Leviathan comes from the water, and the great fish that Jonah, and all those kind of things that we see. But then water also gives us life on the other hand. And so we see these two dichotomies within Scripture, and they're balanced against one another even as we move forward here. So let's see if I can get the slides to advance. All right. So here we are. Then Yahweh said to me, we're where? Isaiah 7? 8:1, sorry. 8:1, sorry. Isaiah 8, chapter 1. I'm reading from the Lexham English version, just so you don't get terribly confused. Then Yahweh said to me, who's Yahweh talking to? Isaiah. Take yourself a large tablet and write on it with a common stylus pen. He's not talking about the iPad Pro. He's talking about, a large, the tablet here is surmised from a archaeological standpoint. It's believed that this would have been a tablet large enough that it could be sat on display for people to see as they pass by it. Okay? Not a tablet that's little, but a large tablet that could be inscribed upon. And on it with a stylus pen. And write this, Mahir Shalal Hashvaz. Swift is the booty. Y'all remember that? Okay? And I will require reliable witnesses as a witness for me. This is God speaking to Isaiah, and he says, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Berechiah. Okay, he's saying these are the two men that will witness on your behalf, Isaiah, that you have heard from me these words. Now, who is he speaking of with swift is the booty? Who's coming? Who do we know is coming? Who's been whistled to? The Egyptians and the Assyrians. Do you see that? Isaiah is prophesying on behalf of Yahweh that these nations, we have the capability of looking in the rearview mirror. They don't remember, they're experiencing this in real time. So this is sort of one of those points where it's like, write it down, because once we write it down and they get here, everybody's going to look back and say, Isaiah said it right there on that tablet. Do you see it? And so we have the privilege of seeing the other side of history, but he's right in the middle of it. And so he goes on and he says, and I approached the prophetess. Approach there means he slept with her. So he had relations, as Jerry Clower would say. And she conceived and she gave birth to a son. And Yahweh said to him, call his name, Swift is the booty. How are you? You're like, wow. So this child, are you paying attention? This child has become the fulfillment of the prophecy of God in the time of Isaiah. What other child has done that in scriptural history? Jesus. Do you see the direct connection? It's intended to directly connect us. That's correct. That's correct. In this time period, from the time of Isaiah saying this, and we're actually going to see that it's probably as much as 3 years are chronologically going to go by, because he's going to call out here in just a second before that child does something. Okay? So he goes on and he says, and Yahweh said to call his name Swift as the booty, for before the boy knows to call my father and my mother, one will carry away the wealth of Damascus, the city we just looked at, and the spoil of Samaria in the presence of the king of Assyria. So do you see who's coming? You know, this attacking empire is coming, and before this child that is going to be born to Isaiah and this prophetess can say mama or daddy, those attackers will be here. So he just made a mark on that tablet essentially. You see what I'm saying? You see the connection here? He just pretty much said, in less than 2 years, they're going to be here. Well, who is they? The one that God is whistling to. You're like, man, I mean, God is like setting out, and he's like, call me a liar if you want, but come back and look at the tablet in 2 years, and let's see if I'm a liar. Do you see how distinctive that is? Have y'all ever noticed this in Isaiah before? Anybody? Isn't it amazing whenever, I mean, to me, I look at this and I go, oh my gosh, this is really fixing to happen. And we know that it happens. And so here it goes. In this part of the passage, we're going to get a sense that time has elapsed. And so I want you to think about it almost like at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. We see the tablet and it's being carved into, and all of a sudden the screen drops at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. The stage gets reset, and the little guy walks across the stage and says, 3 years later, and the screen raises, and that's where we are. And Yahweh continued to speak to me again, saying, because this people has refused the gently flowing waters of Shiloh and rejoices over Rezin and the son of Remaliah. Who is Rezin and Remaliah? Do y'all remember? They were the two kings that were being feared. Remember 2 Bible studies ago, whenever we talked about what shakes, their hearts shook like what? Y'all remember? Their hearts shook like trees in the wind. And Isaiah talked about, remember I showed y'all that video of the trees shaking? These were the 2 kings that they were scared of. The Israelites were scared of. And so now what we're seeing is he's saying they refused, my people Israel refused the gently flowing waters of Shiloh. I want you to pay attention to that because he's going to call it out here. Therefore, look, I can imagine Isaiah standing in Jerusalem shouting, you refused the gentle waters that God sent. The Lord is bringing up the waters of the great and mighty river against them, the king of Assyria and all his glory. So remember, we said in the beginning, in Jewish literature, we know that water represents chaos. And so if you're a people that have come from Egypt, what overflows every year in Egypt? The Nile River. And with it comes all kind of destruction, but also all kind of fertilization, right? And now all of a sudden we see him saying, you refuse the gently flowing waters. So now what I'll do is I will bring the great and mighty river to your doorstep. This is bad news. Because remember, Assyria is where the Garden of Eden would have been located. That region of the world is where Assyria would have been. So the rivers that flowed out of the garden are in modern day Assyria at this time, if we're in the context of this time. And so you see the chaos of the water, and it's like, this is not good. You refuse the good, and now we'll bring the bad onto you. So we keep going here. He says, and he will rise above all his channels, and he will overflow all his banks. Egyptian imagery of the river again, right? This is not good news. And he will sweep into Judah, and he will overflow, and he will flood up to the neck. Isaiah is prophesying metaphorically here, and he's saying, the people, you won't be able to survive. The soldiers, do you remember what the soldiers were described like a few Bible studies ago? The soldiers were described as men who would not grow weary. They were trained fighters, right? And so Isaiah is just taking it one step further, and he's saying it's going to be really bad. And he will reach, and he will spread his wings out over the entire land. This is not God bless America. This is not God bless Alabama. This is God be with us. This is going to be bad. Do you understand the context there? This is not a good thing that he is saying here. Hey, you need to watch out. And so we keep going, and he says, be broken, you peoples, because you refuse the gentle waters of Shiloh, and be dismayed. Dismayed, you think, oh my goodness, dismayed, to be appalled, to be in a state of being struck with dread, fear, or consternation. I don't know what to do. These people are so many. This Assyrian army is so powerful. I have no idea what to do at this point. And so Isaiah is saying, turn, quit, do something. He's saying, you people will be broken. And listen, all distant parts of the earth, their earth was constituted of what primarily? Just the sea right there. The sea, you got to see that, you know what's going on today in that world, right? I mean, that's where the Russian ships are attacking Mariupol. That's Ukrainian. That's the sea that we're talking about. This was the world as they understood it. And he says, this army is the major military army of its time. And he says, gird yourselves and be dismayed. Why do you gird yourself as an Israelite? Historically speaking, what does girding yourself mean? It means take your man diaper and you pull it up in between your legs and your skirt, because you need to be prepared to run. You need to be prepared to fight. Gird yourself. We would think it would look funny to us, but if you had a long flowing robe or a long flowing tunic, you would pick it up to where you could move above your knees so you could move and fight, and you would tie it around your waist. Gird yourselves and be dismayed. In other words, pay attention, doggone it. You better get ready. It's coming. Gird yourself and be dismayed again. If things are repeated twice in Scripture, what does that mean? It is very, very important. You should prepare, God says. Why do you think he says it twice? What does that mean they weren't doing? Not a clue. They weren't even checking up. Make a plan. Think about it. But it will be frustrated. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. What? God is with the Assyrians. He's coming. For Yahweh said this to me, while his hand weighed heavily on me, in verse 11. What does that imagery make in your mind? What do you think about when it says, for Yahweh said this to me while his hand weighed heavy on me? Is that a good thing? How does it affect you think? Makes me think he must be struggling, that the message that is about to be brought is a very difficult one. That this is one that he doesn't really want to deliver, but it's one that he must deliver. And this heavy message is one where he says, and he warned me not to walk in the way of this people. What did Isaiah say in chapter 6 about his lips, why he couldn't be in the presence of God in the temple? Do you recall? It was what? He had unclean lips, and unclean people and unclean lips. And he says, and he warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, you must not call conspiracy everything that this people calls conspiracy. What do you mean? Well, there's all kind of rumors spreading at this point in Damascus. Have you heard what's going to happen? This crazy guy down the street named Isaiah has come to us, and he has told us that somebody's coming to get us. Well, I heard it was the Assyrians. Well, I heard it was the Egyptians. Well, I heard it was the Mesopotamians. All these conspiracy theories coming. No, I heard it was the tribe of Ephraim that was coming back, and they were coming because they were going to attack. You know, all these conspiracies are going on, and they're listening. You must not call conspiracy everything that this people calls conspiracy, and you must not share its fear. We wouldn't know anything about conspiracy theories today, would we, and be fearful of them? Oh, I heard that Joe Biden was going to, and I heard that, how many times have you heard conspiracy theory? And it's like, it's there to try and push the next narrative of fear upon you. It's like, I've already read the back of the book, brother. It don't matter. You see, and you must not be in dread. This is God's plan. It must be this way. God, this is horrible. Why are you letting this world go like it is? Why are so many of the agendas that we don't want and things being taught to our children that we don't like and all these kind of things? Why is that happening? Because it has to. This is the plan. This is part of it, that all the people would hear the gospel of Jesus Christ in all the world, and that we would stand against evil in our time. But we know that the Bible has said that this is what's going to happen, right? In our modern context. Does that mean we just leave it? No, it means we do wrestle against it. We fight against it. But we know it's got to happen as part of the plan. So it goes on, verse 13. You shall regard the Yahweh of hosts. So let's talk about that for just a second. Yahweh of hosts. Who are the hosts? Host of where? Say it again. The heavenly host. You say, Chad, okay, are we talking about the divine council again? Yes. As you read scripture, you will over and over experience this Yahweh of hosts. The God of the Bible is surrounded by a host in heaven. It is referred to colloquially as the divine council. We see it all through scripture, through the Psalms, through Genesis, through Exodus. We see it everywhere, all over the Old Testament. We see these host of beings that are around Yahweh in heaven. And he says, you shall regard the Yahweh of hosts as holy, and he is your fear, and he is your dread, not these other conspiracy theories. You get the drift? Don't fear them. So this should be like a modern day message to us too. Don't fear all this other mess that's around y'all. You're the remnant. You're God's chosen people. Don't fear. The conspiracies that are being talked about, the things that are yet to come, put your fear in the right place. Fear not the one who can kill the body, but fear the one who can. Got it? And he will become like a sanctuary. Who will? Who's he there? And God, Yahweh, will become like a sanctuary. Now look at the escalation that occurs here, okay? Read slowly and look at what happens. He will become like a sanctuary, a tent, and a stumbling stone, a little rock, and like a stumbling rock. And the scripture's unique here. It actually is two difference. For the two houses of Israel. The two houses of Israel, what happened to the other 10? Remember, they've already been taken over. All that's left are the two houses of Israel in the southern kingdom, primarily, that carry on the name of the Israelite tribes that they still exist in. The rest of them have been pretty much carted off and exiled or taken over. Judah and Benjamin, the Benjamites, Judah and Benjamin, I believe. And like a stumbling rock for the two houses of Israel, like a trap, and see how it goes further, and a snare for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. This is key. This is, by the way, this is Jewish poetry that we're reading. And if we were reading it if we could actually read it in the Jewish language, we would actually see it. If you were an English or a word nerd, you would find it very beautiful at this moment because you're seeing this constant changing of words deliberately intertwined in Jewish language that look like one another but are just small differences inside of it. And if you were reading it in the Jewish language, you would just sit here and you'd be like, oh, that's so beautiful. I can't believe he wrote it that way. And it would mean much more to you if you could read it and you could hear it even. You would hear the synonyms that were coming out as you read. But it'll be like a trap and a snare for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Verse 15, and many shall stumble among them. Stumble among what? What did he just say we would stumble on? The stone and the rock. And they shall fall and they shall be broken. And they shall be ensnared and they shall be caught. Do you see the two poetry sections connecting to one another? I pasted it right there in the slide. And he will become like a sanctuary and a stumbling stone and a rock. You see they would stumble. And then you see the trap and snare, and they would be ensnared and they shall be caught. Do you see the connection? Laid right beside one another. It's beautiful. Again, it's just absolutely stunning the way that it was written. And so as we keep moving forward, he says, but bind up the testimony. What's the testimony they have in their possession at this moment and in this time period? The Torah. That's exactly right, Wes. They have the Torah. And so he's saying, bind this up and take these books and seal the teaching among my disciples. This is Isaiah speaking. And I will wait for Yahweh. Now look at this. This is fascinating. Who hides his face from the house of Jacob. You got to think back. We got to map back to Numbers chapter 6, verse 24 to get the context of this. We have to rewind scripture and we have to go back into the Old Testament further. And it says in Numbers 6:24, Yahweh will bless you and keep you. Yahweh will make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. Yahweh will lift up his face upon you and he will give you peace. And they will put my name on the Israelites and I will bless them. Isn't that beautiful how that connects? Do you see the reason why face is important there? They would have known Uriah and Zechariah, the two priests, they would have known this connection and they would have realized, and I will wait for Yahweh who hides his face from the house of Jacob. He is ashamed. God is not approving of what they've done. And I will await him. Do what? The number 624? It is. It's a traditional chant they do as well. There's many, many ways that it's used. And even in modern day music and songs, right? There's modern contemporary music that uses one of the primary songs in there. It's I think if I'll have to look it up, but I think this is also part. I think it's considered the Aaronic blessing. I think is where it also comes from. So anyway, this written testimony, this Torah, is going to be sealed. And remember, a disciple is a learner of the testimony, and it's going to be kept for them because destruction is coming. You see the remnant again? The remnant is going to remember what this is about. So we keep going here. A portent. I did not know this word, so I had to look it up. So I'm going to give it. I hope everybody else knew it, and I was just the dumb one in the room. Portents are equal to miracles, okay? So when we read this together, here we go. Look, he's calling these people. Look, I and the children whom Yahweh has given to me are like signs and miracles. Which children? The booty. And he's got another son. See, you remembered it though. can't remember his name, but no, hey, he couldn't spell it for a few years. So you're in good company. This, we got people freezing. Look, and the children whom Yahweh has given to me, Isaiah, are like signs and miracles in Israel from Yahweh of hosts. You see that? His children. Where else are children like signs and miracles in the Bible? Who? Jesus. I mean, this is like a direct mapping, y'all, which is so cool. He's talking about his disciples, yes. And the one who dwells, there are signs importance in Israel from Yahweh of hosts, the one who dwells on the mountain of Zion. Where does God live? On the high places. He lives on the mountain of Zion, remember? He lived on the Mount Sinai. Now, if they tell you, consult ghosts and the spirits, those who chirp, they speak softly. They talk with just these little stutterings. And those who mutter, you can't understand what they say. Should not a people consult its gods, the dead on behalf of the living? So let me give you a quick idea of what goes on here. Ray Vander Laan, we've used his material sometimes, and he's taught over in the ancient temples of the Far East. And what would actually happen, so for instance, at the Temple of Athena, they actually have to this day discovered a gas leak from within the earth that actually spews from underneath that temple. Now, I'm not talking about like the propane line out here that runs up the field. I'm talking about like a natural methane kind of gas that leaks from underneath this place. So the prophetesses, the oracles that lived within this temple to give them the oracles of the gods would actually be placed. I don't know how else to say it, so I'm going to say it the way I can relate to it. Remember whenever you cooked on a large cast iron skillet and you had that three thing that would hold the skillet up and it would hold what's that thing called? It's a big old pot that you cook in whenever you camp. Boy Scouts cook in it. Come on, y'all. Chris, you were a Boy Scout. Dutch oven. You know how you hang a Dutch oven from those three things that stick up? That's what she would sit in. Just a large Dutch oven holder. And she would sit over this gaseous methane that was coming up out of the earth. And it would make her high. And she would begin to mutter and chirp. And that is what would allow her to receive the oracles to give to people that came to the temple to seek approval for whatever it is they might be asking the oracles of the gods to give them. That is how it worked in this time period. It is archaeological fact. You can go back and look at other documents and find exactly that. So here is what he's saying. He says, you know what? If you don't trust me in my tablet, if you don't trust Isaiah, you know what, you wicked people? Consult the ghost and the spirits, those who chirp and those who mutter. Should not a people consult its gods? You've turned from me and you've turned to your own gods. The dead on behalf of the living? You're consulting the dead to tell you what the living should do? That doesn't make any sense at all. For teaching and for testimony, you want them to act as a testament? What did Jesus say in the New Testament? I don't need anybody to be a witness for me. Isn't that what he said? He said, I'm a witness for myself. Surely they who speak like this have no dawn. That is a cut down. There is no mourning for this. There is no area that you should expect that these people have any semblance of reality. They are listening to people literally mutter and just make little noises to try and get your attention. What a cut down. Isaiah is like cutting them to the quick. So he goes on. He says, and he said, go and say to this people in Isaiah 6:9, we're taking a look back deliberately, okay? We're taking a look back. Isaiah's already talked to these people once, and look at what he told them just a few years ago. Because remember, we're in Isaiah 8, and years have passed since Isaiah 6. You keep on listening and do not comprehend, and keep looking and do not understand. Make the heart of this people insensitive, and make its ears unresponsive, and shut its eyes, so that it may not look with its eyes, and listen with its ears, and comprehend with its mind, and turn back, and it may be healed for him. You see, these people are constantly ignoring God. Ever since Isaiah 6, and now we see it in Isaiah 8, they will not listen to Yahweh. And he has sent Isaiah himself to speak to him. Verse 21, and it will pass through its distressed and hungry, and this shall happen. After we see all this stuff happen from Assyria, and the kingdom is distressed and hungry, when it is hungry, it will be enraged. Why did you let this happen to us, God? Why weren't you with us? We're your people. See how somebody would turn on God all of a sudden? God's warned them, continue down this path and watch what will happen. And it will curse its kings and its gods, and it will face upward. It was their gods. They didn't take care of us. And they'll curse even the kings themselves. Or look to the earth. What's wrong with the earth? Why won't it produce for us anymore? What did God say he was going to curse? The earth itself. Remember that in Isaiah? But look, distress and darkness, the gloom of affliction, you people, you pitiful people. And it will be thrust into darkness. The earth itself will be thrust into darkness. This is not good. Isaiah is just hammering the point home. So we go to Isaiah 9. We're just going to, what's going on? Because they were absolutely deceived. They had lived in a country. Remember what we had seen is that they literally started to worship the other gods again. And so they turned their back completely on God. Do you think people, I think that's a fair question, Jennifer. What do you think today that 100 years from now, if God does tarry, Jesus doesn't come back for another 100 years or so, people will look back at history and go, why did they allow all those babies to be killed? You see how history has a way of finding us oftentimes just as guilty, and you think, no. These people, they were immersed. Imagine if, just for a moment, we took the barriers off of culture. The founding fathers of the United States said what keeps our country in check is a people of morality taught by religion. You hear what I say? And when people no longer adhere to religion, morality begins to flee. And when morality flees, we have the unabated nature of man come out. And whenever that happens, it is at its worst. And whenever we look at culture today, what do we see? We see the transgenderism. We see our children being taught these things. That is the exact cultural that we're stepping into in the Bible in this time as well. And that the culture of the Canaanite people were the sacrifice of their children. That is equivalent to what we see with abortion in our country. That is the equivalent. The Canaanite people worshiped their gods through sexual acts underneath Asherah poles and trees, openly sleeping with prostitutes to worship their God. And what do we see in our culture happening? The sexuality of our culture increasing to the point that we're like, whoa, this is way out of hand, right? And so that's what we're seeing, is this just playing out over again, right? Remember, we talk about the Greek word for it is the kairos moment. And the kairos moment is whenever history just continues to replay itself in a circle. And we just start that history. If you could draw it, you would literally see like a timeline starting, and then it would dip down, and then it would come back around, and we would start the same cycle over again. And that is what we're seeing happening over and over again in Scripture to us here. And so it goes on. In chapter 9, we're just going to delve into the very first part, because I didn't want to end tonight with it being like, oh, Chad, that was just so pitiful. I can't, man, This is horrible. The map on the right, if you'll notice, here is Zebulun, okay, and Naphtali. Those are two of the tribes of the Israelites as they escaped and fled Egypt. This is a settlement map of what it looked like in the promised land after all the kingdoms had been divided. Okay? And so now I want you to read with me here what it says in chapter 9, verse 1. We'll come back to this again next week, but we want to end on a good note. But there will be no gloom for those who were in distress. In former times, he treated the land of Zebulun and Naphtali with contempt. But in the future, he will honor the way of the sea beyond the Jordan, the Galilee of the nations. You see, Isaiah is saying, there will come a time, and a people that will be a remnant, and they will have a place again with God. Yes, that is Galilee and up near Naphtali. I don't know. That was his region, right? That certainly was where Jesus' region was. All right. So, what did we learn tonight? What Yahweh does, he needs no confirmation from others. It is within his purview. Have you ever heard anybody say it's the sovereign Lord? It's a fancy word that we don't use in our language anymore. But sovereign means he requires no one else's approval. He is sovereign over all. Everything is under his control. And we see that in Isaiah, right? Whether it be calling the enemies or whether it be sustaining the people, he is completely in control of the situation. But what we also see is Yahweh has and will use calamity to correct the people. We have seen it over and over and over again through Scripture that calamity is not always that something is God is abandoning humanity. Typically, calamity is coming whenever God is about to show himself large again. We see that throughout Scripture. Can you imagine what it felt like in Egypt whenever God plagued Egypt? It was like, my gosh, is he going to leave anything? And so these people, I can imagine, they were sort of in that same place in Isaiah going, is anything going to be left for us? I thought we were his people, the remnant. Yahweh will provide a better path for people. But if they refuse, you see that? That's our choices today. Will you choose? Will you choose to say, yes, God, I know what history teaches me. I know what your scripture has said. I will choose every day to walk that path you put out. Then do not replace. This is, I think, one of the ones that I think we need to pay attention to because we oftentimes can get unknowingly or unconsciously, we can get wrapped up in fear unintentionally. Do not replace the fear of Yahweh with conspiracy. We see all these things. One of the ones that I've been paying attention to is the impending food shortage we're going to have. Are you aware of that? If you're not aware of it, we have an impending food shortage that will hit our country within just a matter of months. Am I supposed to be fearful of that? No. Am I to plan? Yes. Yeah, why not? Am I to make provisions for God giving me the knowledge and the wisdom to be able to say, hey, I need to be aware of this and do something about it? But am I to fear the food shortage more than the fear of Yahweh? No, I will not. And so what this translates to us in this room as remnants is that doesn't mean we set aside our religion to go do something unnatural because of a fear of the shortage of food. Does that make sense? And go ahead, Philip. The world kind of fears that now. But for those of faith, it emboldens. I feel very emboldened about proclaiming openly more so than ever. Okay. About the knowledge and beauty of Christ. Because the satanic realm is doing the very same thing with impunity, boldly proclaiming what we're seeing Yes.
And so, and we look like the minority, that's what the world sees us as. But we serve the majority. And I really